Hi guys, Chris here with Super Savvy Travelers. Before I do anything, please like this video and subscribe to our channel because we got a lot going on. Also, you want to take our course. If you're thinking of moving to Italy, you need to take our course. There's a link down below. And buy my book if you're buying properties. Oh my goodness, I could save you so much money. Hi guys, Chris here with Super Savvy Travelers. Hey, I'm weighing in because Pete asked me to do a video, like an evergreen video with some information. And I thought I would address the topic of, when you move to Italy, do you want a centro storico, historic, location in the historic centers with everything that entails? And I have some pluses and minuses to go over with you so that you can have a little better idea before you go diving in and buying something and then going, ooh, I didn't think about that. So let's talk about the historic centers first. There's a lot of pluses about these. They're very beautiful. They're very characteristic. They usually have a very close community, which, I have that also as a negative, because when I talk about a close community, it's a close community. It's like having a sleepover every night, kind of. And depending on your neighbors, you could have some that are hands-off, but some can be very, very hands-on. So that's something to think about too. That's not always only the case in historic centers, but that's what I've seen about historic centers. They tend to be much more insular, I'll just say, and very much, part of the community and whatnot. So if that's what you want, that's great. Usually everything's pretty close together. There's a piazza, there's generally shops, depending on the historic center. Now, many of these have been somewhat abandoned, and there's not a lot of shops in the historic center. You have to actually go outside of the historic center and go to the shops there. The good ones have shops, like for example, in Santa Domenica Talao, there's your butcher, there's a couple of supermarkets, there's your hairdresser, everything you need is there. So you really don't need to go out of the town unless you want to do your big shopping at the Conad, which we always love to do because it's awesome. And there's nothing like the cheese department at the Conad or at the Co-op in Tuscany. So there is that. I mean, if you want shopping and stuff, generally you do have to go outside of the historic center to get the really, special things that you want, gluten-free items and that kind of thing, unless your local grocer agrees to stock them for you, and sometimes they do. Nunzia is very good about that in Santa Domenica, and so is Biagio. Another thing is thick walls, and the thickness of the walls really does help keep energy in. Like, it takes a while for them to heat up, but once they're heated up, they stay pretty cool in summertime, unless you have sun coming in your front window in the afternoon. They stay generally pretty cool, and I found even when I did have sun coming in the afternoon, I would just shut the shutters and open them a tiny bit for light, and for the most part of the afternoon you had a certain amount of shade, and then you could open them up in the evening, and it stayed pretty nice. I had fans. I rarely had to use the air conditioner, except in August when everybody has to use an air conditioner. So that's one of the things. Also in winter, when you heat them up, they stay pretty heated, unless you have drafty windows and that kind of thing. That's another thing about historic center locations. Generally, I mean, you can find some that have been nicely redone. We found one in Torita that was beautifully redone, but still retained the characteristic charm. You can find those, but they're somewhat rare. Usually what's available in a historic center is something that's been built, hundreds of years ago. Somebody's grandma lived in it, grandma died, it's been on the market for 10 years. It needs a lot. Some of them don't even have heat or air conditioning at all, with the exception of a fireplace. So that's something you have to look at too. Don't go in expecting to find heat and air conditioning, because it's probably not going to be there unless the place has been renovated. So that's something to think about too. Another thing is steps and stairs. Historic centers, uneven pavement, that kind of thing. With the exception of Torita di Siena, I will say that pavement's nice and smooth. There are some ramps and a few stairs, but you can avoid them really easily. And in fact, we can drive right up to our house and drop off our groceries and then go park the car. And then we don't have to lug all our groceries up into the historic center. It's a very nice historic center as they go. But this is kind of an unusual one. Many historic centers, of course, they're all hill towns generally, unless you're on the sea, like Mola di Bari, but they're generally hill towns and they're up high. So there's not a lot of access to transportation. The buses come every so often, but the rail lines are way down below, generally along the coast or somewhere else, not going up to the hill towns. So that's something to think about too. If you have mobility issues, definitely think twice before getting in a historic center, unless you're right up in the piazza and you can get to everything very easily. The steps and the pavements are generally not even. They've probably been built decades ago and sometimes hundreds of years ago. And they can be really, really brutal if you have hips or backs or knees or something like that. So keep that in mind with the historic centers. Again, except for Torita and Mole di Bari. Another thing about the historic centers is many times the shopping can be somewhat limited. There are small grocery stores, macellerias, and in most of the historic centers, you're probably going to need a car, and there's usually no garages or parking. It's kind of rare if you can find a garage. In Torita, we could not find a garage to save our lives. There is parking and it's very readily available in Torita, but we wanted a garage because we've got our little ape that we're going to use, you know, for the art gallery and whatnot. We wanted it protected, and we had to actually buy a garage with an apartment attached to it. So we're going to use that as a B&B, but we got a garage. They're not very readily available in the historic centers. They weren't built with the idea of people driving cars. And, you know, a lot of the villas were meant for horses and donkeys and people and stuff, not for cars or motor vehicles. Now let's talk about modern apartments. First of all, they're modern. Yay! Second of all, they're usually in a place that's really easy to get to, very easy to drive in. They usually have garages or parking spaces. A lot of times there's not a whole lot of steps to get to them, which is nice. There's way more of those than you will find in a historic center. Apartments that are at a ground level or something like that. So that's something to think about, again, for mobility issues. Sometimes they have lifts. I have yet to see a lift in a historic center, except for that goofy lift that Pete showed me in Diamante that was just sort of stuck on the side. Now you can get lifts installed. They're about 10,000 euros per level. So you're talking about a lot of money. That's in Calabria. Who knows what it would be in Tuscany? Like you go up 3, 4, 5 levels and boy, oh boy, you could be talking about some money. There are those ones that go around the stairs, you know, they're kind of ugly though. I don't like them. Anyway, they are available, but good luck in a historic center finding that. Many times, modern apartments have modern conveniences. There is an exception. In Scalea, a lot of those homes were made for vacation homes. So they don't have heat, they don't have air conditioning, the windows are probably old and that kind of thing. It's not a lot of money like in Scalea to go ahead and get those all taken care of. But it is a cost, and you have to think about that. Heating and air conditioning splits are very easy to put in. In a lot of these modern apartments, a lot of times you're going to find that already done, especially if they've been renovated recently. You're going to find, you know, heating and air conditioning and that kind of thing. Dishwashers are not huge over there. I have one because I like it, but they don't usually have dishwashers. And again, kitchens are furniture, so don't look at the kitchen and go, oh, I love that kitchen, and buy the house based on that, because you might show up and the kitchen will be gone. These apartments that are more modern, you can find anywhere. You can find them close to shopping, you can find them close to the sea, you can find them close to the rail lines. You have a much better choice of where you want to be in terms of services and things like that. So that's something to think about as well. And there are communities in these modern apartments. There are actually very nice communities. I have found that, you know, they tend to be a little bit more reserved. They're not all up in your grill, you know, which is kind of a nice thing. It depends on what you want. You know, when we first moved to Santa Domenica, I loved that. I loved having the neighbors look out for me. I loved having them go, you know, we noticed this about this or whatever. Or opening your door and finding a bunch of vegetables that somebody picked and left for you, which was lovely. I loved that so much. You know, you may find that still, make friends with the people in your building. It just seems a little bit slightly different in a more modern apartment complex than it is in a historic center. That's just my own personal observation. In modern apartments, many times you're going to have a spesa condominiale, which is the condominium fee, like the HOA fee. They're usually not very expensive, but that's usually the case. If that's not the case, you have sort of a cooperative where everybody in the building agrees to do something and you all agree to split the cost. That works generally, but sometimes it doesn't, because sometimes there's one guy that goes, well, I didn't say I wanted it, and then you end up paying for him. That's happened to us before. It was never a lot of money, but, you know, just be aware of that. In the historic center, there's generally no condominium fee. If you're up there next to the roof, you're probably going to own the roof, and you know, you'll be responsible for getting it fixed and whatnot. There's a whole another thing that I can do on that whole thing. So there you go, guys. There's the difference between a modern apartment and a historic center location. I think if you're thinking of a historic center and you have your heart set on a historic center, go live in one. Go rent a place for about 2-3 weeks or a month or 3 months and see if you like living there. By the way, we do have a rental in Santa Domenica Talao, a beautiful 1-bedroom, 1-bath fully renovated apartment that is available as a rental. So you can rent there and see what it's like to live in a historic center. Do you like that type of life? And if you do, then you can start looking for a property there. That might be the ideal scene. So there you go, guys. Hope that helps, and I'll be popping in with some more tips for you in the future. Stay tuned, guys.